Oh, had to burp right when I started the video. Hey, what's up, guys? Little man with a big opinion here. Today's video, I'm going to talk about communications. It is something that I'm seeing more and more being discussed in the news. Most of it surrounding political stuff. But a big part of prepping or Minuteman style stuff revolves around communications. I'm going to go through the list of things that I've thought out, talk about some of the stuff that I've seen different political people talk about. And, if I miss anything, let me know in the comment section down below. Subscribe to the channel, that really helps us out. Like the video if you enjoy it, dislike it if you don't. This conversation's getting started because there's more and more stuff coming out talking about how the left is organizing these protests and patrols and all this different stuff. And what people are figuring out is it's very, very effective. Communications is one of those things that makes or breaks, your whole Minuteman idea, prepping, all of this different stuff. Because you can have all the firepower in the world. You can be as fit as possible. You can have food and water. But, from a military standpoint, if you don't have command and control of that situation, then, it's going to fall apart very, very quickly. So why everything is good, functioning, running, is when you should implement, this communication apparatus. I remember in the Army, squad level stuff is almost all verbal or hand signals. And, that's very easy to do with a group of 12 people. You hit the platoon level, say you got 40 people. Now you've got 5 different people with a radio. And, within a few mile radius, you're able to station people, hundreds of yards apart, where, yelling might get some of it done. But maybe you don't want to involve yelling. And then you think about the vastness of your city, your state, the entire U.S., or your entire country, wherever you're watching this at. And, those small level radios aren't going to cut it. Now we're using, cell phones or ham radios to communicate very large distances. I think about military operations where people are communicating from thousands of miles away. That's one aspect of this. So my suggestion is you get some Baofangs, you set them up. They're kind of glorified walkie-talkies. But my town is like probably 6 miles by 4 miles. And you could effectively communicate with everyone in the town if everyone had a radio. And, a town of 5,000 people, that's a pretty substantial amount. Now, do I have a system set up like that? No, things aren't crazy enough to convince enough people about that. But, in my group of people, we've spent the $30-40, got the Baofangs. We've gone out to our family property and talk with each other from distances where I can talk at this level and clearly understand them from hundreds of yards away. Um, simply I walked back to the truck to grab something. Someone else is at our camp. They want me to grab something else. They can radio, I can grab it. I just saved a trip of 500-600 yards. Um, you know, that is, the whole point of the Baofeng. And you can set them up where you can buy stuff to increase the wattage and make them, have a bit greater distance. Um, but other than that, you're not really getting much. And my grandpa has set up stuff where during, you know, natural disasters, he's hearing stuff from the next town over. Uh, and, being able to coordinate resources and stuff like that. Super important. Uh, but I think, and, a lot of people say it's kind of boring, but just setting up plans, talking with friends and family, text message, phone calls, signal chats, Discord, whatever. Uh, we've got group chats for everything under the sun. I've got a group chat with work where, we got a bunch of this snow and ice, and, our superintendent is not having to go door to door, not having to send out a text message to each and every person saying, hey, roads are so bad, we're not having school tomorrow. He's communicating with a few hundred people. So within your group of people, make a prepping chat. Drop one of my videos, as a link in there for something that you think other people should know. They all get that information. They can watch the video. They can learn something, and be better preppers. Skill videos, workouts, all this different stuff. Like I get on YouTube all the time. I've been watching a whole ton of fitness stuff. Because I'm doing my best to, get physically stronger. But taking all of this information and being able to drop it in one place. All the like-minded people are there. They can click on it and enjoy it, learn something. In the planning process, you might not be able to communicate with all the different people in your MAG or your mutual assistance group. The smallest scale level is in your home. What are we going to do if someone breaks in? What are we going to do if the power goes out? What are we going to do if the house is on fire? Where are we meeting up? That way we can get a head count, make sure all the people are accounted for, the animals, that sort of stuff. What is our fallback point within our home? And a ton of people don't think about that kind of stuff. Think about your house catching on fire. Your number one thing should be you go out the easiest exit possible, which is going to be a door. Secondary is windows. Tertiary is making a way to get out. If you exit the front door because you're closest, another family member exits through the garage door. They're standing, 200 yards away from the house in the backyard, and you're standing on the street in the front yard, firefighters show up, and that's one of the first things that they ask. They handle home fires differently based on, are there people inside, are there animals inside, where the fire happened. They kind of want to know this information. And if you say, my wife and kid, I don't know where they're at, they're going to immediately assume people are in there, and they're putting themselves at risk. You're worrying about something that you might not have to be worrying about, because they're standing in the backyard perfectly fine. Saying, we're going to meet at the mailbox, we're going to meet next to the dumpster, we're going to meet at the neighbor's house. If you can tell them, hey, all of our people are out, got my cat, got my dog, there's no humans, or there's no living thing inside the house anymore. It sucks because they're going to approach that fire a different way, but now you're also not worrying about your people. Grander scheme of things is crap hits the fan. When are you going to start worrying about people that are not meeting up at the location that you need to meet up at? When do you attempt to start to, I think Will Smith and I Am Legend doing the radio broadcasts all the time. I'm probably not going to waste my breath if I know someone lives 10 hours away. My brother's down in McAllen. He knows to meet up here. We've kind of discussed, 3 to 5 days. If he can show up in the same day because he's got his prep stuff, he's got his dog, and he's able to commute the distance, no problems, taking, the easiest, fastest route possible, awesome. If he's got to make detours around, major locations, roadways are blocked, so he's taking county roads, that 10-hour trip can turn into a very long trip. Worst case scenario is he's got to hoof it, and now we're looking at several weeks. So in this plan, do you have any resupply points? Are you meeting up with other people along the legs of the journey? And, we've had that discussion. It would take him 25 to 35 days to get here if he had to walk it. Planning for all of these contingencies. He keeps his vehicle at 3/4 of a tank basically all the time. He's got a couple of extra fuel cans that he typically keeps filled up. Some backup power, food and water. He's also got a hiking pack that's got shelter and food and stuff in it to, keep him going in case he needs to. Kind of backtracking a little bit, doesn't really work so much for work for me because I live 0.4 miles from my work. But, does this happen when you're making your Walmart trip? Does it happen on one of my scout campouts where I'm 2 hours from the house? We we drove about 15 hours to Disney World this last summer. And me and my brother talked about how long that trip would take to get home if we had to walk. When you've got a wife, a baby, a cousin in a wheelchair, it would be like taking the Oregon Trail to get home. But, these are important discussions to have. Uh, my friend Blake wants me to make a video about maps and atlases and stuff like that. I can get a lot of places off of memory. If I had to go, from here to my parents' house, I could do that. There's several people that I go see them hang out, and if I didn't have Google Maps, I wouldn't know how to get there. So, having the backups, the maps and stuff, that's going to be pretty important. Um, something else that goes into this communication is just, knowing the strengths and weaknesses of your group, knowing the supplies and skills that people bring into this equation. You know, you figure out those weaknesses and ways that you can mitigate them or, turn them into strengths. I say it's a weakness that I like my diet soda. This Diet Mountain Dew is awesome. I try to keep several 2-liter bottles on hand to keep myself, as close to normal while we're weathering whatever we're weathering. I took it as far, and if you want me to make a video showing it, making a pine needle soda. And it takes pine needles, water, and sugar, and some, special bottles that allow it to, kind of ferment. It's got a natural yeast that it only takes a few days to make, and it tastes like Sprite. I use a little less sugar than you're supposed to because I'm diabetic. But that's me taking a weakness of mine, and we've got pine trees everywhere. If it, came down to end of the world, I at least have something that I can make that's kind of fizzy, long term wise. I can make batches of it every single day if I wanted to. And that tells me, communicating with friends and family, I've got several of these bottles to make this stuff. And I have stockpiled, I think the last count was about 100 pounds of sugar, which in the grand scheme of things, I probably shouldn't be using that to make a soda, using it for baking and sweetening foods. But I have several people that do not have 100 pounds of sugar. And, we send each other weekly updates. I bought a couple bottles of wine and some oatmeal. I told the people in my group that's what I bought when I went to the grocery store to set aside for prepping. The wine might not be used for prepping, it might just end up being drunk, for social occasions. But we tell each other, hey, I picked up this, I picked up that. For it was $4 and like 28 cents. Gets you 4,800 calories in oatmeal. That's 2 days worth of food for a person. It's, a week's worth of breakfast for 4 or 5 people. And we do that with, the ammo we purchase, the bandages, and, that communication helps. If, like one of my friends, he's about to have a baby, I told him that he should pick up some of the freeze-dried milk. Hopefully he never has to use it for that purpose. That's one of those foods that are going to last darn near forever. And if he doesn't have to use it for that, sweet, he's got it on hand. That's one of those things that is awesome to have. When it finally warms up, I really hope I can finish out our chicken coop. And that's something that we've discussed. It's like, hey, he's going to have 8 or 9 chickens. That's a pretty substantial, protein source. For the number of people we have, it hopefully can be easily scalable to accommodate the number of people. Training stuff. We try to go camping, once every quarter, as a group. And that lets us see the gear that people have bought, showcasing skills, just more communicating. I think that's a super important thing. Even the simple thought of having pen and paper, setting up some sort of code that you and your group understand. Call signs and, naming location stuff. Sometimes it might be more important to call something by a code name than, what it's been called. There's a ton of applications. Every group's going to be different. You figure out what works best for y'all. So, in saying all of this, set up some sort of group chat. Lay out contingency plans, from the smallest thing to the largest thing. Having code words. Cat, go away. Psst, psst. I think she's got a boyfriend outside that she doesn't want me to know about. But you are going to be better prepared doing this kind of stuff because you don't want to be caught with your pants down when it's time to put, your serious face on. Let me know in the comment section down below things that you would add to this. As a reminder, subscribe to the channel, share it with everyone you know, and with that, catch you in the next one.